Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, every week I travel to and from Cape Breton, and many residents of mine with disabilities have brought this issue to light. In fact, I checked today, Mr. Speaker, at 11:04 a.m., and the previous minister approved a project in New Glasgow on Route 105, in fact, where the service road, new development was created, and the minister approved with a private developer a $200,000 project. And Mr. Speaker, this new service road, which is exit 21, is an exceptionally well-designed ramp, and its appearance is very nice. But there is one problem, Mr. Speaker. The problem is this is all a self-serve facility, and people with disabilities have a great deal of difficulty, obviously, obtaining gasoline and other services from this retail outlet. My question to the minister, and being fair with the minister, it's not his file, was done with the previous minister. I would like to ask the minister if he would review this file and table a report as to how he intends to deal with this issue.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much. I thank the honourable member for bringing the matter to my attention. You know, the honourable member would recognize the importance of service centres to the travelling public, and I appreciate him bringing the matter forward, and I'll take the matter under review.
The honourable member for Cape Breton and the Lakes on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And you know, I want to bring to the attention of the minister the construction on Trans-Canada Highway 102, and this is Highway 105, pardon me, through Cape Breton, and it's basically the gateway to Cape Breton, or to Newfoundland, Mr. Speaker. The redesign of the Sea Island Bridge now is in its final stages, and you know, workers are doing an exceptional job there replacing the deck, and they can take a lot of pride in their workmanship, Mr. Speaker. The problem with that for that project is the redesign as well. There are no sidewalks now because they're being eliminated because the road surface is being widened. And again, I would request that the minister review this file and table a report as to how he feels people walking and riding bicycles can safely cross the span.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much. Again, for the benefit of the honourable member, I wanted to indicate to him that the Seal Island Bridge project is one of the most significant capital expenditures undertaken by the government of Nova Scotia. It is literally a massive project costing many millions of dollars, and something that this government is very proud of, Mr. Speaker, because what it will do is ensure that that vital transportation link is maintained in a usable form for many years to come.
The honourable member for Cape Breton and the Lakes on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My last question is to the Minister of Fisheries. Mr. Speaker, in 2002, a parasite threatened commercial oyster stocks in the Bador Lakes. This industry contributes approximately $1 million into the local economy in Cape Breton. My question is, and I'll table a copy of the report, will the minister table an update as to what his department has done to deal with this parasite?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll take that question under advisement. I don't have the information with me, and I'll make it available to the member-ups.
Order, please. Time allotted for question period has expired. The Honourable Minister of Justice on introduction.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to draw the attention of all members to the West Gallery and to the Speaker's Gallery, where there are some members of the family of our Sergeant-at-Arms, Noel's daughter Edna, who happens to be a constituent of mine in Truro Bible Hill, her son Ross, who was up there in the Speaker's Gallery a couple of minutes ago. He was actually, you may have seen a young person in a wheelchair. That was Ross. Is he still there? Is he?
You can't see him.
Okay. I can't see him. Okay. And as well, up in there with Edna is Samantha and baby Ross. Eh?
Oh,
they're gone now. Okay. Anyway, I wish all members would rise, ask them to rise, and receive the warm welcome of all members of the House.
certainly welcome our special guest, the family of the Sergeant at Arms. We hope you enjoy the proceedings today. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South, on opposition member's business.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call resolution number 901?
Resolution 901. The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A pleasure to rise and speak on resolution number 901. Mr. Speaker, a resolution that states, whereas earlier this year the government...
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Member Glace Bay has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Resolution 901, which states, whereas earlier this year the government released Nova Scotia student assessment results, and whereas this government announced our junior high school math scores, which were an appalling 32%, and our elementary math students scored 42%. And whereas the Tory government's Learning for Life plan is a hollow, empty plan conjured up by the previous minister to appear as though she had done something during her time as education minister, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House acknowledge that this government has failed to invest in our children over the last 4 years, as evident in the recent assessment results, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government has failed to treat our children as an investment and instead treats our children as nothing more than an expense. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, mainly because, yes, as one of my colleagues has stated, that's because of our finance minister and the position that he's put us all in, Mr. Speaker, that we look more at the bottom line, at the figures, instead of at our students, instead of at children, instead of the educational level that they should be achieving, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, imagine if you came home at the end of your school day and said, gee, Mom, gee, Dad, look at me, you should be proud of me, I made a 32.
Shame. Shame.
Or I made a 42.
Shame.
Isn't that a great mark, Mr. Speaker? Well, in reality, no, it's not. Anybody would know that. Now, this government can't sit back and say, well, 32%, 42% is indeed a great mark. We're doing well. Over the last 4 years, our kids are making 42% average in math in elementary and 33% average in junior high. Isn't that great? No, it's not. Matter of fact, we're well below the Canadian average in almost all areas, according to that standardized testing, Mr. Speaker. Now, the government likes to say that we're well ahead internationally, which they have quoted. But it's, Mr. Speaker, my question then would be to the minister, what countries are we well ahead of? Would be a very important point to make in this debate. And how does the government announce those results, Mr. Speaker, as well? We've had 4 years under this government, Mr. Speaker, and the marks have steadily declined. But the government says, well, don't worry, we're on top of things. We have a plan. Mr. Speaker, our students stand at the lowest level of testing in the country. We have the second lowest level of funding per student in the country. That's the second lowest level. This government has failed to invest in our children over the last 4 years. And what is it that the government is going to do about it? Well, one of the solutions this government has had to everything these days is to pass out a check for $155. That will solve the educational problems in this province when we give you a $155 check, or what has become commonly nicknamed the rum bottle vote. The rum bottle vote voucher, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, if you take, for example, how much that cost, that $155 check to send out to some 400,000 Nova Scotians, I think I would know a lot of teachers, I'd know a lot of administrators, and a lot of parents in this province that would say, well, wouldn't it be a good idea, and come up with a list of great things that we could do with that money if we were to put it directly into our educational system. Think of the things that we could do if we could just inject that directly into the educational system, and how that would help our children. And Mr. Speaker, we know that we're faced with a situation, although the Minister of Education will work his way around it when you ask him a question, but we're faced with a situation where declining enrollments will leave us with less teachers in this province come September of this year, Mr. Speaker. The minister may issue press releases that say we'll have 127 more teachers next year. The reality of the matter is, no matter what school board you ask across this province, they're all facing the same problem, declining enrollments. And they all have varying ways of dealing with those declining enrollments, but one of the things that they will have to deal with on a regular basis next year will have to be that they simply will have to look at the issue of doing away with teaching positions. That's the reality of the whole thing. What the government has in this case, Mr. Speaker, in this case the previous minister has done is delay and conjure up a program which they've called Learning for Life. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to be harsh on the people who were involved with putting together that report, but Mr. Speaker, it's basically a pretty empty plan. The problem is that it's not adequately funded, and Mr. Speaker, it leaves a lot to be desired. A lot to be desired. We have, for instance, Mr. Speaker, a maintenance deficit for our schools, which now amounts to some $500 million. $500 million. We have children who are going to schools in this province, Mr. Speaker, that are making them sick. Barrington is a perfect example of that. We have schools that are in dire need of repair, Mr. Speaker, and upkeep. I'll give another example which we heard from. We debated this issue last week in this chamber, was the issue of Dominion School, or McDonald School, I should say, in Dominion, Mr. Speaker. One that the Premier, that the government is doing nothing about and has just delayed, and has not told the people of that area exactly what they're going to do. Now, Mr. Speaker, I need not go any further than the Blue Book, in which the Premier is quoted as saying, "Our children deserve to learn in a safe and healthy environment." Now, I have no doubt in my mind that if we asked the Premier, do you agree with that statement today, that the Premier would say, I certainly do. Our children deserve a safe and healthy environment in which to learn, Mr. Speaker. It's not the case in a lot of instances in Nova Scotia today. It's not the case in Barrington. It's not the case in Dominion. And in a lot of areas where our schools are in such dire need of repair, it's certainly not the need there either, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are no targets or measures to see how our students are doing in that program, Learning for Life. It doesn't address the needs of students. There's nothing that even remotely shows that this government is concerned about our children's education, as a matter of fact. And I revert back to my original statement, Mr. Speaker, regarding this resolution, that indeed over the past 4 years there's nothing there to show that this government has always viewed our children as not an investment but an expense, Mr. Speaker, and something that is getting in the way of education progress in the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the declining enrollment problem is a severe problem in Cape Breton, Mr. Speaker. Declining enrollments have indeed been brought about by a number of factors, Mr. Speaker, and none the least of which is the fact that a large number of Cape Bretoners are leaving home to go and find work elsewhere. And of course, Mr. Speaker, when they do that, they take families with them. When our young people leave the island, Mr. Speaker, they not only take themselves off the island, they take our future, Mr. Speaker, as well. And of course, nothing speaks louder about the future of a province or an individual area of this province than its educational system. Without that educational system, how can we possibly attract the business and the industry that's needed to make this province of Nova Scotia greater, Mr. Speaker? So we're left with a situation here, as I've mentioned, Mr. Speaker, and the resolution speaks to that we have math scores and we have math students, Mr. Speaker, in particular, who are coming in at a 32% score. We have elementary math students who are being scored at 42%, Mr. Speaker. And you know, there's a correlation there between how well students do in math and how it relates to how well, in general, I think, how well things are going throughout the entire province and how well this government is doing. You know, that correlation can be made. Our educators are saying...
Give you about the same mark.
Our educators are saying things are not right.
That's being generous.
Our educators are crying out for help. Our educators are saying, we need that help, Mr. Speaker. But over the last 4 years, Mr. Speaker, this government has not been there when indeed they were called upon to be there, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker,
I think I'm going to get Lois to give you a call.
what has the government has failed to realize, as I said, is that, and this is quite typical of this government, Mr. Speaker, quite typical that this government has failed to realize over the last 4 years what it has failed to do. In this case, it's failing. Not only do we have failing grades that are being quite evident in standard testing, but a failing grade from the government in its reaction, Mr. Speaker, in its reaction to everything from education to insurance rates to you name it. This government has failed to come up with the solutions that the people of Nova Scotia are desperately seeking, Mr. Speaker. It's been 4 long, hard years under a Tory government. 4 years, and yet, Mr. Speaker, in every instance, when, for instance, the Minister of Education is asked questions in question period, the minister's response to everything is, well, that bunch over there, Mr. Speaker, they didn't do any better 4 years ago. They didn't do any better 6 years ago. They didn't do any better back then. But, Mr. Speaker, the reality of the matter is that this government has had 4 years, 4 years to do something, and they failed to do it. And what we've watched over the last 4 years is things seriously decline and things seriously erode in this province, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned, it's one thing for government members to stand up and thump their chests and say, aren't we great, we're handing out the check.
The Premier's best trump there from President.
We're handing out the check in June, just before we go to an election. We're going to give you all a check. But if you think about for a minute how much more use that money could be put to, instead of just handing out that check, and again, especially in the area of education. Mr. Speaker, it's high time that this government started paying more attention to the topic of education, to put more into the education system and stop failing the children of this province, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Member for Kings North.
Thank the member for Glace Bay because his resolution underscores, I think, in a backhand fashion, but nonetheless underscores that this government is on the right track. And it's on the right track in determining what level students are performing at presently, because unless we know what level students are performing at presently, we can't know how to help them progress and improve in the future. And so really the resolution, Honourable Member, really underscores that we're doing the right track, we're on the right track, we're doing the right thing. Will Durant, the famous historian and the humorist, he said some time ago, these words, 60 years ago I knew everything, now I know nothing. Education is a progressive discovery of our own ignorance. And that's the problem, Mr. Speaker. We're ignorant about where our standings are now. And unless we determine where our standings are now, we can't improve in the future, as I've already said. Speaking about ignorance reminds me, just as an aside, of an old saying that if you're not a Liberal before age 30, you have no heart, but if you're still one after age 30, you have no head. But back to ignorance. I need to go on back to my comment about ignorance. And this is the problem, Mr. Speaker, that we're ignorant of where we're going. There's the old saying that a politician is one who, when he sets out, doesn't know where he's going. When he travels, he doesn't know where he is. And when he arrives, he doesn't know where he's been. And he does it all on other people's money, which I heard my honourable colleague from Gordy Balser from Digby say sounds like the previous government. So we need to know where we are, We need to know where we are in order to know where we're going to go, and in order to do a proper job of it. A recent study came out showing that very little is known about the standards of education from K to 12 in the province of Nova Scotia. We don't have the objective data that we need. We know, for example, Mr. Speaker, that Canada spends more of its GNP on education than the other G7 nations, according to Stats Canada studies in 97 and 99. But we don't know as accurately as we should where this money is going, where it should be going, and how well it's being spent. And so we need to do these tests. We need to engage in tests. Tests, if used wisely, are a very important tool in helping a government to direct its money properly and to create a proper educational system and to help its students improve pedagogically. The tests, if they're done properly, will allow for comparability, not only between the province of Nova Scotia, but within Nova Scotia between various school boards. It will allow for standardization so that students in Cape Breton will get the same level of education in mathematics as students in the Annapolis Valley, for instance, and it will allow for equality. And so I really want to come back to my original statement that I want to thank the member because I think he really underscored through what he had to say that this government is on the right tracks. We are finally getting a handle on not just anecdotal evidence, Mr. Speaker, but we're getting a handle on statistical evidence that will help us know where we are so we can do the proper things to get us into the place where we want to be. And we have some of those tests. They've been referred to by the honourable member in the minister's report. The plans, the program of learning assessment for Nova Scotia students, which tests language and math for elementary, junior high, and senior high students. The Nova Scotia examinations directed to grade 12 students in language arts, science, and math. Math is in development. Right now it's language arts and science. And the School Achievement Indicators Program, which are national assessment tests that our students take for 13-year-olds and 16-year-olds in mathematics, reading, writing, and science. And the results are here, published for everyone to see so that everyone knows the standards we're at, so they know where we're at now and where we can improve. And the honourable member would want to see this booklet. The honourable member also mentioned the international tests that we engage in, and I should have mentioned that as well. The PISA test, the Program for Integrated Student Assessment, we came 14 out of 42 countries, and the honourable member wanted to know one country we're ahead of, and that country is the United States, our neighbours to the south. We are ahead of our neighbours to the south in our educational standards. Now, we're not at the place we want to be. I'll admit that, Mr. Speaker. I'll admit that quite readily. We want to be further along. These results that appear in this booklet are not acceptable. But as I said before, we need to know where we're at now so we can plan where we want to go in the future. And we're starting to do that planning. That planning came out, and there's a booklet here, Learning for Life. Obviously, the honourable member hasn't read it properly, because if he'd read it, he'd have read the wonderful things that this government's doing to improve and to start from this level that we've now established and to help improve the mathematical and the language skills of Nova Scotia students. And if the honourable member wants a copy of it so he can read it, I'd be happy to send it over afterwards. But let me just very quickly talk about some of the things in that Learning for Life booklet, because a great deal is being done to improve teaching and learning in mathematics. Let me give you some highlights, Mr. Speaker. We now require board accountability for progress action plans and targets to increase student achievement. The speaker from Glace Bay, the MLA, said that we're doing nothing. There's nothing there. Well, there's nothing there, then how come we're requiring board accountability for progress, action plans, and targets to increase student achievement? Doesn't sound like nothing to me. It sounds like something, but that's just one of many things. I'm going to run out of time talking about the things that we're doing, but he says there's nothing there. Let's go on to something else. We're continuing elementary and junior high math program assessments in elementary and junior high. He still says there's nothing there. We're introducing grade 12 mathematics examinations January of 2004. There's nothing there. We're informing parents of student progress in mathematics as a priority, and we'll continue to plan to publish this minister's report to parents telling them how their students are doing so they can know, so we can plan, so we can improve. But he says there's nothing there. We're implementing minimum daily time requirements for mathematics in grades primary 6, 7, and 8, and requiring 5 minutes of mental math daily for grades 1 to 9, but the member says there's nothing there. He's surprised. He says there's nothing there. I've already talked about 4 things. My mother loved this one, to tell you the truth. My mother, when she heard that we were emphasizing the basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic, she told me to give the Minister of Education at that time, the Honourable Jane Purvis, a big hug, which I did because she says we're on the right track. We're on the right track. I won't tell you what the minister said, but he says there's nothing there. We're going back, and he says there's nothing there, doesn't he? We're targeting funding for math leaders in every board in the province to help them teach better. Well, what's he say? What's he say? He says there's nothing there. We're investing in professional development for math leaders in every
Order, please.
school.
Just want to remind the honourable member Kings North he's not to be using props, so he. Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Just remind all members not to use props, so I'd ask them not to use the props. So you put them down, and
He hasn't read the booklet because he says there's nothing there, and I'm just trying to tell him that there is something there. So I'll give it to him after I speak. We're developing resources for parents to help their children at home, but he says there's nothing there, Mr. Speaker. We have a mathematics strategy to include smaller classes from P to 2 so that teachers can spend more time at those very early years when they need to spend the individual time with the students. We put $18 million, I think, into this. But he says there's nothing there, Mr. Speaker. $18 million is nothing. We've invested, as I say, in math leaders, $1 million. Here's the breakdown. Of course, it's nothing according to that Honourable Speaker, but to Nova Scotians it's a lot. 16 teachers working directly with the department to launch the math strategy from P to 9. $225,000, nothing there according to him. A lot there to these math leaders who are doing the job. 880 school-based mathematics teachers trained in May and June. 34 workshops alone, Mr. Speaker, to help teachers teach mathematics better there. But he says there's nothing there. Targeted funding provided for board-based math leaders in every program, $555,000, but he says there's nothing there. We're providing more than $1 million in classroom mathematics resources. We've conducted 5 summer institutes for teachers, serving 233 teachers, Mr. Speaker, but he says there's nothing there. And this is just in the year 2002, 2003, 2004. We'll continue this targeted funding for math leaders. We'll introduce new accountability mechanisms, that is, requirements for board reporting on actions to improve student achievements in mathematics. We'll conduct another program assessment of elementary mathematics, and we'll introduce mathematics examinations for grade 12 students and conduct mathematics workshops for every principal, about 440 in total, and he says there's... And Mr. Speaker, I still have 4 more pages of things that are in this, sorry, I can't refer to this booklet, but 4 more pages to go on of things that we're doing to help improve the math and the reading and writing abilities of students. We'll provide, for instance, Mr. Speaker, a practical, comprehensive, grade-level, specific teaching resource for every math teacher in grades primary to 9 with sample math, lesson plans, combined classes, assignment tasks, homework assignments, home support activities, worth $130,000, but Mr. Speaker, he says there's nothing there. We'll begin a multi-year, multi-million-dollar investment in new math resources for students grades primary to 9, $500,000 alone in that for credit allocation, and resources that link literacy and mathematics together, and that costs $65,000, but he says there is nothing there. We'll invest more than $100,000 in resources for parents. Let's talk about mathlets, booklets, pamphlets, homework, other materials, better links between the math classroom and the home student. But he says there's nothing there. We'll introduce an online question bank, Mr. Speaker, for grades 10, 11, and 12 in mathematics. An online over the internet to strengthen these classroom assignments. But he says there's nothing there.
It sounds to me, Mr. Speaker, that really it's not the problem that there's nothing there in our plan, but there's nothing there in his criticism. And that's where there's nothing there. In addition, I can continue. I'm going to run out of time here, Mr. Speaker. We have a new calculus, grade 12 course. We'll introduce 220-hour course options for grade 10 mathematics. He says there's nothing there. I think...
Order, please. The honourable member's time has expired. The honourable member Timley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to assure the previous member there is something here. And I'd like to point out to you that as far as I'm concerned, if we are going to use test results, achievement test results of our children to take shots at local MLA contests in Halifax Citadel, then the resolution is out of line. The resolution is out of line because test scores in classrooms are continuously misused. And how have they been misused? Well, let me tell you. First of all, they're used to rate schools. Wrong thing to do. They're used to rate teachers. Wrong thing to do. They have been used in this situation to take a cheap shot at a previous Minister of Education because of local politics. Wrong thing to do. Absolutely wrong thing to do. I would like to give a history lesson quickly to the members of the third party. I endured Robbie Harrison. Let me tell you about Robbie Harrison, the Minister of Education in a previous government. And I know there are some members opposite who can give the same history lesson when we endured the excuses, the delays, and some of the worst decisions that were made in education. So I think there's enough blame to spread around without particularly turning to a previous Minister of Education on an issue that today she is not responsible for. I think that has to be made very clear, because when it comes to test scores, let's face it, test scores can be misused. They can be misused. Now, there are some teachers opposite. There are teachers in this caucus, and I think it's of real import to realize that if you're going to wave around test scores and going to say that's the reason the test scores have been down, then if the grade 8 test scores are down at Brookside Junior High School, do I turn to Jamie Stewart, the teacher, or do I turn to the Halifax MLA from Halifax Citadel to blame? What am I supposed to be doing? If I'm a parent, do I go to the teacher and I say to Mr. Stewart, Jamie, what's the story here? Do I have a problem? Does my son or daughter have a problem? Or does that particular parent make an appointment with the MLA for Halifax Citadel and say to that MLA in her office, you were the Minister of Education, how come my son or daughter's test scores have been in the tank? Now, you know the answer, and I know the answer. The answer is that when it comes to test scores, they should be relegated within the school, within the classroom, with the teacher and the student. So let's get that out of the way right from the get-go, Mr. Speaker. I want previous speakers and speakers to join in. If we're going to use our kids, if we are going to use our schools, if we are going to use our test scores to score cheap political points, then we might as well not stand in this place and have a debate on a topic of this importance. If we're going to look at test scores, let's look at some of the factors that are involved. Now, let's not say that this particular government has done everything. In fact, in some cases, their lack of consultation with teachers truly alarms me. And I can point out examples. I know the minister and I have had these conversations before. When it comes to curriculum changes and how often they're made, Mr. Speaker. I mean, I can tell you as a school administrator and as a classroom teacher, I often said to math teachers, I wouldn't do your job. I would not do your job. Because the reason is, Mr. Speaker, and I know those of us who have children in the elementary or the junior high system, and I know the member from Inverness is shaking his head, nodding in agreement, because the curriculum changes in math are just ongoing, Mr. Speaker. They're ongoing. And I can use the example of a young man who I was fortunate enough to recruit into the teaching profession. His name is Cal Jakeman. He lives in Westwood Boulevard in the community of Upper Tantallon. He teaches math. He told me of the number of outcomes that he has to have to measure his success for his students. Now, Mr. Speaker, if we're talking curriculum changes that mean something, a young progressive teacher such as Mr. Jakeman should be consulted. But instead, the results come in, the curriculum's laid on the desk. This is what you're going to try and do, Cal. You're going to try and handle this amount of curriculum in a math course. Now, Mr. Speaker, how do we measure success? Well, I would encourage the members of the third party and the Liberal critic in particular to accompany me tomorrow to a workshop that's going to be held over at the Holiday Inn at 99 Wise Road in Dartmouth. What makes an effective school? There's the invitation, and I hope you don't consider it a prop. What makes an effective school, Mr. Speaker? And let me tell you, that is going to be a session that I would encourage as many members of this legislature to be present at. One of the things that it takes to have an effective school is to make sure that you measure the success of your students. And when you measure the success of your students, Mr. Speaker, it does come down to academics. It does come down to pass or fail. It does come down to 90s as opposed to 80s. And I will agree with the member from Glace Bay when he stands in his place and brings out those horrendous numbers. And there's no use mentioning the numbers. They are disappointing. But the point of this, Mr. Speaker, is that an effective school is more than just having those test scores as low as they are. The effective school will take those test scores and they will improve upon them. They will learn from what they have been doing correctly and what they have been doing wrong. And in education, Mr. Speaker, we must admit that we have to learn from experience. As you well know, Mr. Speaker, we always learn from our mistakes. When you are teaching math in particular, students learn from the experience of having a mistake. But they mustn't be afraid of making a mistake, Mr. Speaker. And I want you to know that test scores, and many young people take it quite personally. Now, we, of course, have been aware of some recent scores, some results when it comes to ranking of schools, Mr. Speaker. And I've been approached by students in my community who are concerned about that sort of use of rankings and test scores. How does a teacher feel? How does a student feel? How does a school community feel when they see these test scores that are suddenly made public? They have to be put in perspective. Test scores have to be put in perspective. Now let's look at some of the uses that have been in the past of these test scores. In some situations, particularly in schools where you have teachers that have no tenure, you can go to a teacher and say, you know, I saw that your grade 8 section A, let's use that as an example, your grade 8 section A had a failing mark. But grade 8 section D, and we no longer use those A and D categories, I think that members opposite would be aware of the fact that, again, there's that stigma to the letters. Instead, in some cases, you go by the homeroom teacher's last name, Mr. Speaker. In some cases, you go by other codes. But the important thing is that when the school administrator goes to the teacher and says, you know, are you concerned about the test scores? Are we concerned about how we are doing from one school to another? Because inevitably, Mr. Speaker, that's what happens. Teachers, students, parents compare test scores. And so it's of real import that the teacher says to the administrator, says to the superintendent, or says to the MLA, yes, I have concerns about the test scores. But by waving them around and saying, we're not getting enough books, we're not getting enough money, instead, the teacher has to feel that he or she is being listened to. So let's have a curriculum change. Let's look at a particular curriculum change that has caused some real problems in elementary schools in the community that I represent, and that is the new science curriculum in the elementary schools. Now, there has been a progressive step made. Let's call it like it is. And if the members of the third party aren't willing to do this, we have to admit in opposition when a good move has been made by the previous Minister of Education, by this administration, that there was the wise decision made that in grade primary and 1, there would be a restricted number of students in each classroom. That is a progressive step. I attended the press conference. I sat there and listened to the minister as she made that announcement, and afterwards, I want members present to know that publicly and privately, I congratulated the minister and her staff on that issue. But, Mr. Speaker, and members present, that is one step. There must be a plan in place so that parents can have faith in the fact that their teachers and they themselves as parents are going to be listened to on this issue, so that we can go from primary and grade 1 and we can continue to move along as we look at other student-teacher ratios in other grades, particularly at the junior high level. Now here we are, and we're talking about grade 8 math scores. And I know that the MLA from Inverness will agree with me on this, and I would hope that there would be parents present who would be listening to this, but I want you to know that grade 8 is a tough year. It's a very tough year in the school system. It's a very tough year, particularly if you're a junior high young man. But then again, that's another topic. But in the midst of this, I want you to understand that test scores cannot be taken in isolation. Test scores cannot be suddenly waved around publicly when you compare one school to another school, one teacher to another teacher, or one candidate for the riding of Halifax Citadel or another candidate. That is not the use of test scores. That is not, after all, how this debate should be unfolding. There should be a way to look at these items, to look at them realistically without using test scores to score cheap political points. That resolution was intended for that reason. That resolution was brought forward because the current member for Halifax Citadel, in her previous role in cabinet as the Minister of Education, is in a tight fight in Halifax Citadel. And of course, we do know that Mr. Delafis, the previous member for Halifax Citadel, will win that when the time comes because he has the experience. And I wouldn't admit today that I would probably think that Peter Delafis probably took the day off unless he's in an apartment building. He's out knocking on doors. Peter Delafis doesn't need cheap political points with test scores to prove that he can be the MLA. And I discourage the members of the third party and the current leader of the Liberal Party. This is not the way to go. He should rise above this and not use our children and their test scores in such a manner.
Thank you. I recognize the member from Richmond.
Well, Mr. Speaker,
Where's the member for Kings North?
You know,
There's nothing there.
hearing the member from Timberley Prospect become the chief apologist for the Tory party, how ironic to say the least, and to talk about cheap politics. Well, this is a party, the NDP, whose leader was referred to as an ambulance chaser. This is a party who has gone out and asked Nova Scotians to send them their uglies. This is a party that has continually used seniors' examples to try to, for their own political gain, and try to distort facts. And yet, he has the unmitigated gall to stand up here and accuse others of cheap politics. Speaker, I would urge the member to go to the washroom and to look into both sides, hold on to the basin and look directly in the mirror if he wants to see cheap politics. But again, Mr. Speaker, I digress on this important issue. I want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, what I found also very interesting is to hear the member from Kings North stand up here and talk and accuse others of ignorance. Now, Mr. Speaker, if there's one member that lives in a glass house when it comes to the issue of ignorance, it would be the member from Kings North. And one need look no further than his article of last week to see true ignorance in pure form, Mr. Speaker. And to hear the mayor from Kings North accuse others of ignorance, and to accuse the mayor from Glace Bay through his resolution of being ignorant, Mr. Speaker, how ironic. How ironic. One can only hope, Mr. Speaker, that it's certainly not the member from Kings North who will be called upon to review the history courses offered in this province, considering what we saw last week. And to hear him today stand in this House and accuse others of ignorance and not having all of the facts or misrepresenting the facts, Mr. Speaker, truly it was unbelievable, to say the least.
Order. I recognize the member Kings North on a point of order.
Yes, please. Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to clarify that I never accused any member of being ignorant. What I simply said was that we were ignorant of the standings of where students are, and that's why we needed to do the testing. And the testing was done so that we would know where to improve and how to improve. That's what I said. And to twist my words, I think is...
He'll apologize. He'll apologize.
Order. 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 I appreciate the member from Kings North intervention. I wasn't in the chair during his debate, and I guess I want to make clear that we are debating a resolution, not necessarily a dispute between members as to, well, yes, exactly. So I would suggest that the member from Richmond focus on the resolution and not on the individual members and their comments, please.
Well, Mr. Speaker, with all due respect, I think your colleague from Timberley Prospect used quite a considerable amount of time pointing out and pointing the finger to our caucus here and my colleagues. So I would just point out again, Mr. Speaker, how ironic that we'd have the mayor from Kings North stand up and accuse someone of distorting the facts or distorting history and not accurately reflecting it when one looks at what we saw last Thursday, written by that member himself. Something absolutely disgraceful, to say the least, Mr. Speaker. And if his colleagues on that side support the comments that he made, I would urge them to stand in their place and indicate that they do support the exact comments that came from that member. And I believe I've used the opportunity to express personally what my feelings were towards that column and towards the author of that. Mr. Speaker, as a member that comes from the Strait Regional School Board, to say that our education system is not in a crisis is certainly not an accurate reflection of what we face and what the students face in our particular board. For the member in Kings North to stand up and say they have a wonderful plan and all these lofty goals, yet I would ask him to explain, to take one of those goals and explain what it means in practical terms and explain what it will do to help the students in the Strait Board or anywhere else around the province. Mr. Speaker, their Learning for Life plan was not established by educators, it was done by spin doctors. Like so many of their other plans, it's fluffy messages. It's meant to put out this feel-good message out there that this government has a plan to address the real needs of our students. We all know, such as their health plan, that is not actually intended to accomplish that. Mr. Speaker, when I hear the Minister of Tourism, the Mayor from Inverness, say that the education system in the Strait area is not in a crisis, how ironic as a former educator who himself saw exactly the situation that we face. Mr. Speaker, again this year, 15 less teachers in the classrooms of the Strait Regional School Board. Now that's 15 this year. Mr. Speaker, if one was to go back in the last 4 years under this administration, each and every year there has been less teachers in the classroom. More and more what has happened as a result, our students, in order to take what one would consider to be typical type courses, such as honors math, for example, are now having to resort to taking those courses through distance education. Is this what the plan of this government is? More distance education, less teachers in the classroom? What the minister shot back is that we have a great teacher per student ratio in the Strait Board because of declining enrollment. What he does fail to talk about is the programs that are being offered, how many programs are under distance education, and how many programs actually have teachers in the classrooms to provide the instruction for those students. Mr. Speaker, that is what it comes down to. And as I've said before in the past, the Strait Board has a proud history of producing some of the most talented, competent, intelligent students that have gone on into different professions and have gone on to make our province proud. And it causes us great concern that we might be slipping in those efforts and that the proper attention and the proper resources are not being directed to the classrooms in our area to make sure that that success continues. Yet, Mr. Speaker, while the Strait Board has undergone a great deal of reduction because of declining enrollments, within a number of years, it's happening right now. The Cape Breton Victoria Board will be under the exact same situation as they also are faced with significant declines in their enrollment. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, this is something that unfortunately will probably be encountered by school boards throughout the province and that they will have to face. But I can tell you right now, Mr. Speaker, and I would challenge the member from Inverness to say that it's not so. It has now come to the point that in many ways, our students in the Strait Board are not receiving the same programs that are being received by students in Halifax, for example, or other parts of this province. They're having to rely upon distance education, whereas students in other boards have teachers in the classroom for those same programs. Mr. Speaker, at that point, you no longer have equality in the education system here in this province. Never a day did any of us want to see that our students would be disadvantaged based on their geography, or that students in other areas of this province would be advantaged over them. Mr. Speaker, that is not what we envision in our education system, and we must work all together as elected officials to make sure that that doesn't happen. Mr. Speaker, municipal officials are being called upon, municipalities, to provide more funding to the education department through the funding criteria that is established. Yet at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, when I asked the Minister of Education, who's from Antigonish, who's an educator himself, would he step in and intervene to ensure that those 15 teaching positions in Strait Board would not be cut? He said, no, I'm not going to do that. The Minister tells us he's going to hire an extra 129 teachers. What does the Minister not tell us? How many teachers are going to be retiring and leaving the system who won't be replaced? I would submit to you, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, even with the 129 teachers starting September of 2003, if we are to believe that is correct, I assure you we will have a loss as to how many teachers we have today and what we will have starting September 2003. This government knows that. That's why the Minister of Education refused to answer that question. That's why the Minister of Tourism won't get up and answer that, speak on that point, because they are aware that their government is finding a way to try to gloss this over and say we're hiring up more teachers without admitting the fact that they're not replacing retiring teachers. Again, at the end of the day, we will see a loss of the amount of teachers, and again, I would submit to you, Mr. Speaker, a loss to the students, the parents, and the communities throughout our entire province. Mr. Speaker, in my question today, I indicated that over the next 5 years that we are going to lose a significant amount of students, such that by the year 2006, 2007, I believe the total figure was 485 less teachers than what we have today if we are to follow the funding formula currently employed by this government. Mr. Speaker, that is almost 500 less teachers from one end of this province to the next. Yet this government would have us believe that everything is great in the education system. They would have us believe that they're hiring more teachers. They would have us believe that more Nova Scotians are able to stay at home and teach in our schools. Now, Mr. Speaker, 500 less teachers. Let the member from Kings North stand on his feet and say where the Learning for Life plan is going to deal with that. Let him stand on his feet and indicate why students in the Strait Regional School Board are not being offered the same programs with teachers in the classroom as what is being offered in other schools and other boards. See, that's the points, that's the reality that they don't want to talk about. Yet, giving out these fluffy messages of how they're going to fix all the school problems and how everything's going to be better. Mr. Speaker, what is that meant to do? That is meant to try to get reelected rather than trying to solve the problems faced by the students of today. Speaker, we all know as elected officials, if our province is going to be able to turn things around, if our province is going to be able to be independent and to be able to grow our economy where we wish to grow our economy, one of the solutions to that is to continuing to have a competent, highly qualified, educated workforce. Mr. Speaker, that begins in the classrooms of this province, from grade primary forward. Yeah, Mr. Speaker, that is why we continue to say that this government must pay attention to that. That is why today we've used the opportunity. One example is the test scores that have been provided, which clearly indicate that we have a serious problem. Mr. Speaker, maybe the member from Timberley Prospect doesn't believe there are problems in our education system. That is up for the NDP to decide going in next election if they also want to go on the doorstep and congratulate the member from Halifax Citadel for her great tenure as Minister of Education. That is their choice. Mr. Speaker, one will see what type of reaction that member and even the Tory colleagues of the minister also will encounter by making that sort of claim. Mr. Speaker, in 1999, the Blue Book speaks for itself. This government had all the answers. This government had all the solutions. The Premier said, I will fix the problems in education, as I will fix the problems in healthcare, roads, hospitals, everything else under the sun that he could possibly think of in his 240 promises. At the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, the results are in. This government has failed in their commitments to the students, the parents, the teachers, and the school boards of this province. That is the reality. The test scores are but one example of that failure. Mr. Speaker, the point is, though, who pays for that failure? I would submit to you, Mr. Speaker, all of us will pay for the failure of this government by not properly being able to address the issues faced in our school boards and faced in our schools. Unless we continue to graduate from our schools the top quality, highly educated students that this province has such a proud history on, then we are doomed in our efforts to try to turn this province around and to become a half province that can be independent and that can grow on its own, Mr. Speaker. Without a properly funded education system, it simply is not possible. And Mr. Speaker, for 4 years, the Minister of Finance has continually viewed education as an expense rather than an investment, and he's had to have the member from Halifax Citadel and now the member from Antigonish be the chief apologist for him in his efforts to fail to address the problems there is in education. Mr. Speaker, that will be part of the legacy that the Minister of Finance will leave as he leaves this chamber, in knowing that the problems continue to exist in our boards, they continue to exist in our classrooms. Our students are not getting the education that they deserve and they should so rightfully have. And at the end of the day, it's a loss for all Nova Scotians and one of the best examples of a failed legacy of this government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order. Before I call on the Liberal House Leader, can I ask the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries for an introduction?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the members opposite for allowing me to do this. I'd call the members' attention to the gallery opposite. We have a visitor with us today. It's the new president of the Nova Scotia Agriculture College, Dr. Philip Hicks. He's currently working with the federal government in Japan and has agreed to take a position. We'll be starting there in June, so he's dropped in today. He attended the graduation at AC, and he's looking forward to taking up his role and responsibilities there. So I'd ask the members to give him a warm welcome to Nova Scotia.
Thank you, and welcome to our guests. I recognize the Liberal House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill 21?
Bill number 21. I recognize the member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, I know this bill speaks to a very important issue as far as I'm concerned. The Sydney Casino Charity Trust was a fund that was set up for charity, Mr. Speaker, and as some of the government backbenchers have spent during a period of debate today with, I must say, some lighthearted jest. When we talked about the Learning for Life document, they said that I said there was nothing there. Well, lo and behold, Mr. Speaker, the 50% of the Sydney charity that was set up,
You can really say there's nothing there.
I can really say there's nothing there now, because there's nothing left, because this government, Mr. Speaker, made sure of that. The profit from the Sydney Casino was to be divided 50% for charity and 50% for Native people in this province, Mr. Speaker. No additional tax dollars were to be needed for that program. It was to be self-sustaining. But instead, what we found when this government came to power, Mr. Speaker, one of the first moves that it initiated was to get rid of the profit, 50-50 sharing of the profit from the Sydney Charity Casino. Mr. Speaker, the ink wasn't even dry on the advertisements that were already ready and it was already advertised for charitable groups to apply to get money from the Charity Trust Fund, from the Charity Trust. Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said, the ink wasn't even dry when this government put the axe to it and said we're going to take that money and put it into general revenue, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's been estimated that that would probably amount to over $5 million by now. That would have been money that was destined for charities in this province, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't know if we can't appeal to the mind of government and we can't appeal to a sense of common decency, then maybe we should make the plea to the bottom line of this government, which is always money, Mr. Speaker. Charities have to have money to sustain themselves. So with a charity, a little bit of money actually goes a very long way. $5 million, for instance, Mr. Speaker, could have provided 5,000 charities in this province with $1,000 each. And, Mr. Speaker, with volunteers, the charities would have made that money go 1,000 times farther than government can make it go. Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't have to tell you or anybody in this House about the importance of volunteers and how much they contribute towards the economy. As a matter of fact, they contribute nearly $2 billion to the provincial economy. That's according to the GPI, the Genuine Progress Index, Mr. Speaker. GPI Atlantic in 1998 did a study. It found that some 81,000 jobs and 10% of the gross domestic product is a direct result of volunteer charitable work. And what they estimated, Mr. Speaker, was the real value of volunteer work is about $2,500 for every man, woman, and child in this province. So, as I said, Mr. Speaker, appealing to the Finance Minister's bottom line, at least recognize the money that was meant for charities. The money would have been money for the economy, which would have been money for his bottom line, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, of course, the Finance Minister can't tax charities.
Not yet.
Not yet, anyway. He hasn't yet, but I'm sure if he could, he'll find a way, Mr. Speaker. That $5 million, Mr. Speaker, that we're talking about here could have gone a very long way. It's a very small sum compared to, on average, $100 million. $100 million that the average Nova Scotian commits to charity every year, Mr. Speaker. In fact, we have some of the most generous people in this country. Nova Scotians give more of their time to volunteer work than any other Canadians, Mr. Speaker. About 134 million hours to helping those in need and caring for their environment and contributing to their communities, Mr. Speaker. I know at the point in time when this program was stopped, Mr. Speaker, when the Charity Trust was wiped out, I know at that point in time, for instance, that the Glace Bay Food Bank had applied to that Charity Trust, Mr. Speaker. They had filled out the application, and they had indeed been ready to put it in the mail and send it off so that they could get perhaps whatever their fair share would be, and it would go towards the operation of the Glace Bay Food Bank, Mr. Speaker. But what happened was because that Charity Trust was cancelled, they got absolutely nothing, Mr. Speaker, from the Charity Trust Fund, which that's the exact reason, the only reason that it was set up. The Sydney Casino was to be a charity casino, and 50% of the profit, Mr. Speaker, were to go to charities throughout this province. Throughout the province, Mr. Speaker, not just in Cape Breton, not just in the Sydney area, but charities across this province would have been able to apply for monies that they could have used, Mr. Speaker. So it was so crassly taken away by this government, Mr. Speaker, that it almost goes against any common sense argument that you could make, Mr. Speaker. I don't know anybody who could argue and make sense that it actually made sense to take what would have amounted to by now well over $5 million that could have been used. But perhaps there are some members over there that support the way that was done, Mr. Speaker, and if that's the case, then we'll be hearing from them, Mr. Speaker. You know, this was actually the first swipe that the Tory government took at Nova Scotians when they came to power.
One of many.
Something happened, Mr. Speaker, to this government between that election and now, because as you've seen, Mr. Speaker, we've seen all of the red carpets being rolled out and the announcements that are being made leading up to the next election, Mr. Speaker. In their campaign book, Mr. Speaker, stated on page 23 that we recognize the particular knowledge and understanding of people who work both as volunteers and employees with community-based agencies and nonprofit organizations that are on the front lines of service delivery because they are close to the action and they see firsthand the needs and have a unique appreciation of their requirement to make every dollar count as an investment in quality of life, Mr. Speaker. They must be properly supported. Those are words from the Blue Book. Well, Mr. Speaker, those are pretty hollow words. Noble, but very hollow in this case, because that's the exact people that they struck out first when they decided to do away with the charity trust, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have to, and they still have the opportunity to restore the Sydney Charity Trust, Mr. Speaker. It's an opportunity for the Premier and his government, a chance to redeem themselves. If indeed the Premier is a man of honor and integrity, Mr. Speaker, then it's a chance for him to show that he's a man who lives up to his word. Mr. Speaker, he has a chance here to take the moral high ground, Mr. Speaker. Or at very least, he and the Finance Minister and the Cabinet have a chance to show that they have some heart. There's still some heart left in this heartless government, Mr. Speaker. It's a time to do the honourable thing. It's a time to do the right thing, Mr. Speaker. It's simply a time to just put the money back, Mr. Speaker. I don't think there's a Nova Scotian who would say that they've done anything wrong if all of a sudden they decided that, look, we may have made a mistake, it may have been a little hard and perhaps a little too harsh to take that money from what it was intended to do, intended to help charities, volunteers throughout the province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that there are many members who have found their way here on the political scene because they were involved at first with volunteer organizations. I think of perhaps members who are perhaps members of the Lions Club in their constituency or any other charitable organization, and the great work that those organizations do throughout this province, the Kinsmen, the Lions Club. You know, you could go on forever, Mr. Speaker, to name. And I'm sure that there are members who know that those organizations are under some tough times in this day and age. That perhaps a couple of $100, perhaps $1,000, perhaps more, would go a very long way in sustaining the work that those clubs do and the fine work that they do. Now, here was an opportunity, a perfect opportunity, to get money from somewhere that it wasn't there before. And organizations have a difficult time on the streets of our province right now, Mr. Speaker, going out, whether they go door to door or they do their collecting. I know a lot of organizations in Glace Bay, Mr. Speaker, that will go and bag groceries at the various grocery stores. And they may make, on a good weekend, they literally make maybe a couple of $1,000s, which goes towards their yearly operational costs. But it makes the difference between whether or not their organization continues, because they're totally charitable, nonprofit organizations. And, Mr. Speaker, they get no money, for the most part, from the government. The government doesn't donate money to keep the Kinsmen or to keep the Lions Club or the Scouts.
Gives them grief.
Okay, it doesn't. In this case, all it's given them is a little more grief than what they actually needed. Because this was an opportunity simply by writing out an application. If you were a charitable nonprofit organization in Nova Scotia, the applications were printed. In some instances, the applications were sent out by the former Liberal government, may I add, sent out by the former Liberal government to help charities in the province of Nova Scotia. And then along, Mr. Speaker,
You placed the order for them?
along came John. Along came John.
Buchanan?
No, along came John Hand, Mr. Speaker, and all of a sudden, cut. And the first cut, the most heartless cut of all that this government has made, Mr. Speaker, was to say to those hardworking, dedicated volunteers in this province, the people who run nonprofit charitable organizations, the people that work with our seniors, the people that work with our children, the people that work with people of disabilities in this province, Mr. Speaker. Those people, this government said, we are going to take any chance whatsoever you get of making a little headway with a little extra money, and we're going to rip that right out of your pocket and put it into the general coffers of the province of Nova Scotia so that we can use it for whatever purpose we want. Mr. Speaker, I guarantee you, not one red cent of that money has ever found its way back to a charitable organization in this province.
Shane, how much
Not
did it cost
one
them, though?
red cent.
How much did the cost go up under this government?
And you can be guaranteed in a lot of instances, Mr. Speaker, that charitable organizations, nonprofit organizations, are having a tougher time even surviving in this province right now under this government, Mr. Speaker.
User fees.
Everything has gone up. User fees, they'd be paying more, and some of them are in jeopardy of just being obliterated, Mr. Speaker, because of what the actions of this government in the last 4 years, Mr. Speaker.
Shane.
It was a perfect opportunity. But as I said, Mr. Speaker, I know I don't have much time left. As I said, this is also a perfect opportunity for the government to step forward and put its best foot forward.
Repent.
And actually, yes, as my colleague from Richmond says, a time for this government to repent. There are some things that are unrepentable. But in this case, maybe not. Maybe not. In this case, this is something that can be fixed rather quickly. All it would take, Mr. Speaker, all it would take is to put the Sydney Charity Trust back, the Sydney Casino Charity Trust back in place. And I may add, Mr. Speaker, that it would be a good opportunity to take that $5 million, over $5 million that's been taken from the trust, and perhaps kickstart it and put it back into the trust, and let's build on it from there. So that charitable organizations and the volunteers, the heart of communities across this province, can say, finally, this government has done something right. Finally, this government has shown that it has a heart. Finally, this government has shown that it's a government of integrity, and that we believe that this government will help the people of Nova Scotia simply by reinstating
Time's running out, though.
the Sydney Charity Casino Trust, Mr. Speaker. It would be the right thing to do, the honourable thing to do for this government. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Finance.
Speaker, I was interested in hearing the member opposite's comments in regards of the Sydney Casino, and talking about the fact that under the previous regime that they had promised the people of Cape Breton, especially Nova Scotians, that they would give half the casino profits to charities. Now, before you get into this discussion, we should also get into the whole discussion of casinos. And Mr. Chairman, when the member opposite is talking about integrity, talking about being open with Nova Scotians, I seem to recall, and I wasn't a member of the House at the time, Mr. Speaker, that the former Liberal government with Mr. Savage at his head and the former Finance Minister Bernie Boudreau at the helm of the Finance Department said, we're going to go out and we're going to consult with Nova Scotians, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker. And so, you know, in an open forum. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Jerry Fogarty, who turned out to be a speaker after that, actually headed the select committee that went around. And they listened to Nova Scotians from Cape Breton all the way down to Yarmouth and all throughout the Nova Scotians.
And what did they say?
Mr. Speaker, what did they say? They told that committee overwhelmingly that they didn't want a casino in Nova Scotia. So, Mr. Speaker, I find it amazing, Mr. Speaker, that when they came back and they reported that to the cabinet, which received the report, and it was a very clear recommendation. It wasn't a whimsical type of recommendation that was vague. That it's amazing, Mr. Speaker, that the Liberal government, John Savage and Mr. Boudreau, decided that Nova Scotians had spoken, and also Jim Smith was there, that Nova Scotians had spoken, and that they would indeed put a casino in place. Now, we should always remember where these casinos came from, Mr. Chairman, and the member opposite is saying. Members are saying, well, why do you still have a casino? Well, Mr. Chairman, they also signed a very, very thorough contract with the casino. Now, I could go over in length some of the discussions that took place in this House in public accounts as how the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia dealt with the casino operator, Mr. Chairman. And there are many records on file that spoke about how Mr. Fisk, who was the head of the gaming corporation, which was established to be an arm's-length organization, Mr. Speaker, so that the casino would not have direct contact with the government. And those hearings will show that there were discussions directly between the minister and also the Premier's office. Those were the things that were said in this House, Mr. Speaker, not what I'm saying. That's what was documented in this House, and the members can read the records of public accounts. So, Mr. Speaker, he says by the NDP. Well, I will say, Mr. Speaker, that if anybody believes that this is just generated by the NDP, you should go back and read the public accounts. Because anybody to say that didn't listen to the discussions that took place in this House when the whole controversy was about how the Liberal government had allowed itself to deal directly with a casino operator during negotiations. Now, I might not do everything right in my capacity as finance minister, but I respect the Nova Scotia's Gaming Corporation's authority, and I don't deal with casinos. They deal with them at arm's length the way that it was supposed to be, Mr. Speaker. So that is a bit of the history of how things evolved. Why do we have one in Cape Breton, Mr. Speaker? Probably because Mr. Bernie Boudreau represented that area, Mr. Speaker. You know, the big question a lot of times is to say, well, why would they put a casino in that small of a market? You know, and if you want to get down to the facts, I think the facts speak for themselves. But in that, there was an announcement by Mr. Boudreau that half of the profits would go to the native people of this province, Mr. Speaker, and the other half would go to charities. And the member opposite, when he did say that, that is an accurate reflection of what Mr. Boudreau promised. Now, that was probably an easier sell in Sydney to get a casino there than not to do that. And I guess you could say I'm imputing motive for Mr. Boudreau. I wasn't here at the time, but in retrospect, looking back at the facts, that is probably the justification for doing so. Now, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Boudreau can answer for himself, I have no problem doing that. Now, Mr. Speaker, in regards of the casino and the fact that half of the profits were to go to charities. Now, Mr. Speaker, when we became government back in 1999, one of the things that we faced was about a $500 million deficit. And we had told Nova Scotians that we would bring about some financial stability to the finances of this province. When we defeated the government, we didn't know the magnitude of the problem. But I will say, Mr. Speaker, when we put the budget together and it was $500 million deficit, one thing that our government didn't do, we didn't stand up and say, the problem's bigger than we thought, and because of that, we've changed our mind. Mr. Speaker, with the leadership of our Premier, we kept to our commitment. We didn't change our mind, we didn't change our time schedule, but it made the problem altogether more serious for us to deal with. Now, Mr. Speaker, the members opposite talk about the Liberal Party's conviction towards charities. But it was amazing that they passed this bill, you know, but the bill just lay there for years and nothing happened. And they said it was all ready to go. You know what I mean? It's amazing how their memories can be skewed over time. If it was such a good idea, if it was so good for charities, Mr. Chairman, Speaker, why in God's name didn't they start it 2 years earlier? And they had to wait until somebody else inherited it. It's just amazing how their memories have been skewed over the years. The other thing that happened today, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, the member for Glace Bay said that the Glace Bay, I think he was a Glace Bay Food Bank, could have used that for its ongoing operations. Yeah. Obviously, he hasn't done any research because this type of monies, Mr. Speaker, was not for ongoing operations of charities or nonprofit organizations in this province. It shows that he didn't do his research because he's a member of a party that put the program in place, Mr. Speaker, but never, ever initiated. That is a matter of fact, and the members opposite can check the answer, they can check the bill, and the fact of the matter is they had ample opportunity to do so, and they never did. If it was so important, why didn't they do it? Now, it's amazing when they get on the opposition side that somehow they become the saviors of Cape Breton, become the saviors of Halifax, they become the saviors of Nova Scotia. We made some difficult decisions to bring about financial stability in this province, and this is one of those decisions. And we did make a choice. And we did make a choice. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, that bunch ducked their responsibility when they were in government. And the audacity of the Liberal Party to go in the Red Room when the minister is talking about his speech and to say that he balanced the budget and a surplus of $1.5 million. By the time he crossed that room, across the foyer to this room, he had $500 million deficit. Amazing how Mr. Down calculates things, you know. Now, you know, so today the member for Glace Bay is saying that we should spend a couple of million or $3 million more, or whatever the number is, towards charities. And they are good causes. I don't argue that. And at the same time, his leader is going out and is saying that debt is the overwhelming problem, and we can't add $1 to the debt. And that is his personal commitment. And if he was elected, he would do it this year. Now, you know, you can't have it both ways. Yesterday, in question period, some of the first questions were concerning the debt. The funny part about it, the second half of the question period was where we could spend more money. That member, the member for Glace Bay, was saying that we should be spending more in higher education, more in education. You know, you can't have it both sides. If you want to be a responsible opposition, you have to keep singing from the same song sheet from the start to the end. The Liberal Party has not done that. For the Liberal leader to stand and to say that he will not add a cent to the debt, the only way that he could do that, Mr. Speaker, is to either virtually cut most of the capital program spending of this province, Mr. Speaker, or to cut the program spending for some of the things that they're asking for more money in this House. You know, so when I look at it, they say it's all about choices. You're darn right. People made a choice. They made a choice that they wanted some financial stability. Did we deliver that, Mr. Chairman? The answer is overwhelmingly yes. But the fact of the matter is that did we please everybody by doing that? Of course we didn't. There were difficult decisions to be made. But today, we made decisions to spend money, whether or not it was in education. We made decisions to spend money, whether it was in health care. You know why we did that? We did that because we brought about a balance. Now, Mr. Speaker, 2 years in a row that we have balanced our budget. Once you start doing that, you get into a position that you can see the forest for the trees. You know, another thing that I really find amazing from the Liberal Party is that they've been speaking against the tax cut. And Mr. Graham says, you know, we're going to, if we're elected government and I'm premier, which the probability, Mr. Chairman, is so minuscule, I won't, it's like winning the 649. But I will say, he said that if we are, that we will increase the taxes back to where they were before. And he said that. That's a matter of record. And the stimulus to the economy is not of a concern to him. And, you know, and so they're against giving tax relief to Nova Scotians. You know, and on the record, Mr. Chairman, on the record, we will find many members of that Liberal caucus who are on record about two years ago, and I can get the exact quotes if you want and pull them up, that were asking this government to index or to deal with Bracket Creek and to give income tax reduction back 2 years ago. You know, they were asking for us to do that when we had a deficit. You know, this is the Liberal Party saying give tax relief when we have a deficit. That's a matter of record. That's not me saying that. That's the Liberal Party saying that. Today, after we've balanced the budget for the second consecutive year, they are suddenly against giving Nova Scotians tax relief. You know, I look at the Liberal Party leader, Mr. Graham, you know, and I know it's difficult to espouse very clear policy, and I know it's difficult to be a leader, and every new leader comes in and they get a honeymoon. But you know what I mean? You can't have a honeymoon forever. And eventually this spring and this winter, that's when everything sort of hit the fan. Mr. Graham changed his mind with regards to tax policies. It must have been about 6 or 7 times in a week and a half. He was changing policy.
Order. The Honourable Minister of Finance is speaking on Bill number 21, and I've given him some leeway, but I think in the more recent moments he's been speaking more on an issue that isn't directly related, and if he can either bring it back to the bill or wrap up, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Finance has the floor.
Well, and I will bring it back, because what has happened here is that the member opposite is asking for us to spend money. He is asking for us to give monies towards charities. And to do that, that is part of an overwhelming budget. And that means that we have to make decisions because money doesn't come from anywhere. And I'm trying to explain to the members that the same party who is making the proposal is also saying that we shouldn't give tax relief, and they're also saying that we should be spending more, and they're also saying that they won't add to the debt, and they're also saying that they probably won't be building very many capital projects, Mr. Speaker, because for them to achieve the goals that they've espoused, that's what will happen. Now, we look at the situation that where they're going in this regard. I go back to what the original program was set up by the Liberal Party, and it was going to be given to non-profit organizations. And when they call that charities, charities is really not the proper analysis of what the original bill was to do. It was to go to non-profit organizations, and that could be ballparks, Mr. Chairman, whereby they could get money for that. It could be green areas. So when people look at that, they have this impression that this program was meant to help only things such as food banks or other types of organizations. Now I go back. This program and the criteria that they had set up the first time, it was never to be meant for ongoing operations. It was meant to be special types of projects, which mean that it would not be given to fund an organization in an ongoing way. So, when we look at that, if people in Nova Scotia feel that, that they should get money for ballparks or they should get modifications to other types of community buildings, we have programs for that. We have it in Sport and Recreation Commission, and we also have it in other types of departments. So when we looked at this area, we looked at this as an area that we could make some changes. And to say that I didn't expect it to be controversial, Mr. Speaker, of course I did. But I will say some of the other decisions that we made were very much controversial. And Nova Scotians told us, thank you very much, Nova Scotians told us that we should concentrate on the areas of spending that they considered to be of a priority. And what were they? They were things such as healthcare, as education. They also asked us to be dealing with transportation issues. And so where have we gone? Those are the areas. We also have invested, Mr. Speaker, huge amounts of money in community services to try to get people who are in need back on their feet, to get a job and to have dignity. And we made many initiatives in that department, which were things such as training, also providing people in need with people leaving social services with pharmacare benefits for a year after when they go back to work. Those were not cheap initiatives for us. It paid for us overall because we've increased the number of jobs in this province, 27,000 over the last 4 years, Mr. Speaker, and about 80% of those are of a full-time equivalent. So have we made progress? The answer is yes. And for the member opposite to say that the charities is to give monies to
Order. The member from Cape Breton West on a point of order.
A short question based on this recent comment.
Okay. Order. I recognize the member for the Honourable Minister of Finance, who has 30 seconds left.
I will say, in regards of the member, charities are. I altogether don't blame the member for bringing it forward. I know that he's concerned with charities. I've explained the position of the province, that overall we made the decisions for the betterment of the province overall. But I will say that we have other programs which they can use, and I'm hopeful that they will. But overall, I think the investments that we have made are for the benefit overall of the province as a whole, and we're prepared to deal with the decisions we made because I believe that we're well thought out.
Thank you. I recognize the member from Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, first of all, I want to start off about, I guess, correcting something that the Minister of Finance said that this was a money bill. And we all know that it can't be, that the opposition can't put forward a money bill. It'll be ruled out of order. So it wasn't the money bill. This is not a money bill. Now, where I have a problem, and I hear what the minister was saying in regards to using, that there's some tough decisions had to be made. And I fully agree with the minister on that, Mr. Speaker, that there was tough decisions had to be made. But there's a definite line between a tough decision and a mean decision. And I think this was a mean decision. you know, to understand the culture of this province before casinos, one must look at the toing and froing of what was going on with gambling machines, particularly VLTs, in a lot of our areas. It started out and as a truly unregulated industry that people in corner stores had them and bars had them, and there was no control. They were wide open. It was literally the Wild West when it came to the proliferation of VLTs. And then they're around...
Order. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Finance on a point of order.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, in regards to the member opposite brought to my attention, he said that this was not a money bill. Mr. Speaker, I would refer you to Section 912. I do believe that this is a money bill, and as such, I'm not really sure whether or not it's appropriate to be discussing it. But anyway, I'm just bringing that for that attention. If it's not, I'm more than prepared to stand and correct it.
Order. We've already had first reading on this bill, so obviously the Speaker's already ruled that this is a bill that's in order. So we're in the middle of debated second reading, so I wouldn't say that's a point of order, but I appreciate the Minister's intervention. I recognize the member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again, I thank the Minister for his intervention, but as usual, he's wrong.
I agree.
Was I wrong? Was he wrong, or did I get lucky? I don't. Mr. Speaker, but Mr. Speaker, we talked before I was so keenly interrupted. We were talking about VLTs and gambling machines and so on. So, Mr. Speaker, what happened, as I was stating, that a lot of these were in corner stores and bars. Then we came and we started to see regulations, and the next thing you know, that these were moved strictly into licensed establishments, Mr. Speaker. They were put in bars, and there was an acceptance of these machines within licensed establishments. They were no longer permitted in convenience or corner stores, Mr. Speaker, and at that point, government had a hand over it, Mr. Speaker. So from that point, we come on, and what we did is we found that there was indeed a problem with gambling in this province, Mr. Speaker. It was coming up. There was horror stories after horror stories of what was going on with people around VLTs. So what we did, Mr. Speaker, was, again, the government moved forward on a plan to introduce casino gambling in the province. Now, Mr. Speaker, casino gambling in this province it was a strange concoction to start with. That it clearly became a direct competitor with established licensed premises in this province. It clearly became that. But you know what, Mr. Speaker, if you remember, the Savage government at that day told us that this was going to be a panacea, that, you know, we would be Vegas North, that we would have tourists beaten down our paths to come here. But what they didn't, Mr. Speaker, I would contend to this day that the majority of patrons at the casino in Sydney are residents of CBRM. They are not tourists. They are not people even from outside the county of Cape Breton, by and large, Mr. Speaker. I would put forward today, Mr. Speaker, that great panacea of we're going to be, as Reno, Nevada portrays itself, the biggest little city in the country. We've never become that, and we have never been allowed to become that, Mr. Speaker. And I don't think we ever wanted to become that. But part of the inducement, to bring casino gambling to the Cape Breton area was negotiations with the native population, who said, well, you know, we don't see you have any rights over us and as a federal entity, so let's talk about this. And the other side was, you know, let's appease the locals. And one of the sides of appeasing the local residents was that this would not be run as a for-profit casino, but indeed that it would be run as a certain amount, 50% of the profits would go to charities. Now, the Minister of Finance may be exactly right in his analogy, or in his interpretation, it should be his interpretation, of what that money was to be spent on and what it cannot be spent on. And I would contend that he's accurate, that he's informing the House of what is fact. But, Mr. Speaker, what I find nonetheless offensive to what the government has done is to no matter how bad the previous government had acted around those casinos, that it took the good faith of the people of industrial Cape Breton and turned it around on them and said that $2 million or whatever, or the $5 million that's projected by the member from Glace Bay, is better spent in their capacity than somebody else's. And that went a long way to deterring determining the financial nature of this province. Well, Speaker, I would say that other things had a greater role to play. I think we talked in this House just yesterday. The extra $7 million last year that balanced the budget from the taxation, the 4% tax paid on automobile insurance, Mr. Speaker. The $4 million gained in the first 3 quarters of last year in monies spent on driver's abstract when the fees went from $7 to $8. These are monies that I think the government has taken off the backs of Nova Scotians. You know, it's interesting whenever we get into a debate about about casinos, because it's never one that's we can really debate in complete openness, Mr. Speaker, because again, I find myself in agreement with the Minister of Finance that they didn't. These negotiations were held, and it's proven record. We have it within Hansard, and it's a record of this House. It's a record of a committee of this House that there was interference by a level of government as opposed to the arm's length group that should have been running it, Mr. Speaker. So we have that problem. But nonetheless, I digress there for a moment. I believe that the government had no moral right in touching that money. We can sit here today and we can argue about the bad deals, and we can argue about whether there should be smoking or no smoking in casinos. But, Mr. Speaker, we can also talk about judicial law as opposed to moral law. And I would tell you, judicial law is not worth a thing if we don't live by a moral code, Mr. Speaker. And a moral code tells us that we entered into that deal as the government accepts the premise that it's an irrevocable deal that they entered in, although it's bad. The former Liberal government entered in with casinos, and they're willing to uphold it. Then I think they have that obligation on this side, the moral obligation, to have kept that money for charities. For the minister to say, well, if a not-for-profit group wants a baseball field, or if they want a basketball court, we have programs for that. Well, Mr. Speaker, there is, in some respects, a program for that, but it's not really, what this is meant to be. When we're talking about not-for-profits, and we're talking about, whether, as the member from Glace Bay stated, that it was possible that for instance, the food bank in Glace Bay could access that, and the minister flatly denies that it could. Well, I categorically disagree with the minister on this. It's clear, like it or not, food banks are becoming a part of our neighborhood. And part of that is it's becoming not a one meal a day type institution, Mr. Speaker. It's becoming breakfast, dinner, and supper for a lot of Nova Scotians. And I think in a lot of places it's going to necessarily mean at some time they may need those type of facilities like the minister spoke about. Maybe, while kids are coming home from school and being fed at one of our food banks, that there may be some hoops set out back so they can shoot some hoops while they're waiting to get probably their only good meal of the day. That's the sinful side of this, Mr. Speaker, that we do not acknowledge the level of poverty in this province. But yet, $2 million or whatever the $5 million, even if you look at the Liberals' projection, if assuming they're accurate, what that could have meant to some of these organizations, Mr. Speaker. And again, I hear what the minister says, but the minister is not thinking in a larger umbrella. He's just thinking in very narrow and saying, oh, well, they can't buy a stove or they can't buy a fridge with it, which he's probably right the way it was written. And I agree with him in the sense that, when he says, if it was so important, and this is why I argue with this government today, of why not, when you say it, put it in legislation and trench it. It doesn't wash with me when they say there was no profits there then. It was no sense of making of entrenching it in legislation. Well, darn, if you put it in legislation, it stops these foolhardy things. It's like my argument recently with the Minister of Environment and Labor around workers' compensation changes, and he's putting everything in the regulations. Put it in the bill. Put it in the bill, and then it's not open to the discretion of an order in council. It's there, and if they want to change it, it has to be brought back to this House for real negotiations. But no, the Liberals decided, in their haste, they certainly made waste. They didn't allow this to put in here for us to argue, and that does not make their bad bill, or their lack of a bill, does not make it right what the Minister of Finance did. The Finance Minister, I contend, could have made other changes that would have balanced this book in this province, Mr. Speaker. But no, he decided to do it on the back of the most vulnerable. So we have a problem with that, Mr. Speaker. So the minister wants to have us believe that was the only way Nova Scotians can have a balanced budget. Well, there's not a person in this province that really believes that, Mr. Speaker, that that's the only way we could have had a balanced budget, was taking away something for the most vulnerable in this province, just because I can do it. So what we have here is I believe, is a position by the government in power that was basically not a moral act, that they didn't have, they should not have had the moral ground to do this, that, we have had problem after problem with gambling in this province, and it's caused enough concern. Had we even taken that money and did something to help those people, that we could have done something useful. But, they took that money and put it in the bottomless pit and used it as their daily capital, Mr. Speaker. So, while I fundamentally agree with the bill, the essence of it, it's when you, and I know the minister or the member from Glace Bay that brought it forward talked about forgiveness and atonement. Well, part of atonement is accepting your sins, Mr. Speaker, and this is the one thing that member didn't do, was take his own party's sins in this and atone for those and then ask this government to do it. So, you know, Mr. Speaker, I certainly say hate the sin and love the sinner. And Mr. Speaker, I thank you for your time.
The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton West, to close debate on Bill number 21.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise in support of Bill number 21, which essentially deals with the issue of charity casinos in Nova Scotia. And before I get into the essence of some of the issues surrounding this particular piece of legislation, I think it's only befitting that we put on the record our concern as a caucus, the Minister of Finance's comments about those that were receiving social assistance in this province, indicating that they, as a government, put a lot of money into helping people on social assistance so they could get off and have some dignity. Is the Minister of Finance suggesting that anyone that receives social assistance does not have dignity? That, to me, is perhaps one of the most patronizing, condescending statements I've heard a Minister of the Crown make towards certain people in Nova Scotia that have had the misfortune, that have, well, Mr. Speaker, never once did I belittle someone because of their level of income. Never once did I chastise them because they didn't have the certain advantages that other people in society in this province have had. And the member from Preston should stand and apologize for that type of attitude, because that neoconservative attitude, divide and conquer, and make those who don't have the advantages of the wealthy and the big business and the more fortunate in society, make them feel like they're inferior or some type of a liability in this province. I think that is shameful, Mr. Speaker, which is all the more reason why that member from Preston and the Minister of Finance should stand and support Bill number 21. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance is talking about a balanced budget. By his own admission, he has indicated with his truly balanced budget, he has borrowed $118 million more than he took in. So if you're spending $118 million more than you take in, obviously you must be in a deficit position. Well, the Minister of Natural Resources says he wouldn't expect me to understand, or the people of Nova Scotia to understand, that if you borrow $118 million more than you take in, then that's not a deficit. Is it any wonder that he was part and parcel to the Ben McCrae deals of the 1970s and 80s, where they near bankrupt this province, Mr. Speaker? The antics of the John Buchanan administration, where they gave millions, tens of millions of dollars away to rich people in this province, but won't give a nickel to the poor people of this province. Mr. Speaker, absolutely shameful that he would try and make the people of Nova Scotia believe that that's okay. Is that the type of Nova Scotia he wants? Shame on him. Shame on him. What about the electric toilet seats that he was in the department when they spent millions of dollars on? Mr. Speaker, shame on him. Mr. Speaker, they talk, Mr. Speaker, about how they've saved money on the culture division through the Nova Scotia Arts Council by getting rid of that arm's length council. Okay, let's say they did save the money, Mr. Speaker. What did they do with that $1 million that they said they were going to save? Let's take a look, Mr. Speaker, at the public accounts for the province of Nova Scotia. You know what they did? They put it into the minister's office and the corporate structure surrounding the minister so they could further politicize the arts and culture of the province of Nova Scotia for political opportunity. Mr. Speaker, and what are they doing for the poor people? Nothing. Nothing, Mr. Speaker. They make them feel guilty because they're not going to get the tax rebate because they said they're not worthy of it. They're not going to do anything for the poor people because they're receiving social assistance, so they don't have dignity. They're not worth it. Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Order, please.
You've got him on the run now, Russell.
The Honourable, the Minister of Justice on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, there are something like 26,000 more people working in Nova Scotia now than there were 4 years ago. The number of people working in Nova Scotia in last month was the highest in this province's history. And that's what you do to get people, as he's talking about poor people, is you create economic opportunities so they can go to work, because people want to go to work, not to do what that bunch wants to do.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. On the point of order, I have to say, as referenced in Beauchesne, the Parliamentary Rules and Forms, 6th edition, Fraser, Dawson, and Holtby, that the point of order that the Honourable the Minister of Justice raised does not meet the terms and conditions of a point of order. The Honourable the Member for Cape Breton West has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That would be referenced as a social contract. Mr. Speaker, yes, Mr. Speaker, we're pleased to see people to be able to go to work. The more people, the better. But for that minister or his colleague, the Minister of Finance, to say that people don't have dignity or shouldn't have dignity unless they have a job, Mr. Speaker, I think that is terrible. The Minister of Justice, who just spoke, if he would refer to a press release that his own government put out yesterday on Crosley Carpets, indicated that it had created 16,000 jobs in Nova Scotia, not 26,000 jobs. So I would please submit, would they get their figures straight? Well, in Truro alone. Maybe there's 26,000 people wanting to leave Truro with the type of leadership that's being provided, Mr. Speaker. But let's look, Mr. Speaker, before we get right onto some of the ways that they could have spent that money and still derive a benefit to the taxpayers of Nova Scotia. The Minister of Finance says it's a balanced budget. And yes, the debt's going to continue to grow. Well, if the debt's going to continue to grow, then this strong leadership, a clear course, the Blue Book, which the Premier says he will not add 1 cent to the debt of this province, is a fantasy. It's a fantasy, Mr. Chairman.
Order, please. The Honourable the Minister of Justice, on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, a colleague actually placed this newspaper in front of me, which I'm prepared to table, and it's an objective opinion, Mr. Speaker, and I just see the title is, I don't know the Honourable Member agrees with this, is that work is the most effective antidote to poverty, and that's what this government has.
Order, please. Order, please. It's not necessary. Order, please. It's not necessary to table that newspaper. Order, please. It's not necessary to table that newspaper, and that, again, does not meet the terms and conditions of a point of order. The Honourable the Member for Cape Breton West has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Really what the Minister of Justice is trying to do is to deflect attention away from the real feeling of this government, how it has towards the disadvantaged and the poor people of this province. They're saying that you shouldn't have dignity unless you get a job. I don't dispute the fact that, look, every job that's created is an advantage for anyone that has the opportunity and the good fortune to have one. Not at all, Mr. Speaker. But let's look at the issue of the charity casino. All the people in Nova Scotia, and we know, Mr. Speaker, volunteerism in Nova Scotia is equivalent of close to $2 billion saving to the taxpayers of Nova Scotia. If we were to translate that, Mr. Speaker, into a cost of government, whether it be volunteer firefighters, whether it be volunteer police service, whether it be volunteers at food banks or what have you, Mr. Speaker, translate that into a job prescription, and what do you have? You have an additional cost to the people of Nova Scotia of $2 billion. So what's $5 million? What's $5 million in relation to $2 billion? Think about the people, Mr. Speaker, just here in Halifax alone. What about all the different boys and girls clubs in Dartmouth North, in Dartmouth East, in Sackville, Mr. Speaker, in Spryfield? All these organizations are very worthwhile organizations. And since this government came to power, what did they do? They cut back funding for these organizations, Mr. Speaker. They did, and the record will show that. Are you talking about an opportunity? These organizations could have very well applied for funding from this charity casino fund, Mr. Speaker, and the Minister of Finance says, well, you had it for 2 years, you did nothing about it. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, there wasn't a profit, so you couldn't take money out of a fund that wasn't there. The Minister of Finance knows that. The first opportunity with this board to work...
Order, please. The Honourable the Minister of Finance on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite said there were no funds there to distribute. That is not the case. The member opposite should be much aware of the fact that there were funds out of the profits. Mr. Speaker, when we came to office, there was $3 million in that fund. They never distributed it. It was there for a considerable length of time. Don't tell me that you distributed, that you could have distributed, couldn't because it wasn't there, because the monies were there. You didn't do it. The fact of the matter is, now that you're in opposition, you've changed your mind.
Order, please. Order, please. Once again, that doesn't meet the conditions of point of order. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Mr. Speaker, the board that was being set up, which was appointed by Cabinet, was having its first meeting to decide all the applications that had just come in to do that. And what did this government do? They surreptitiously removed all legal entity, and they claimed that money. They sucked it away from the poor people of this province. This is the same Minister of Finance who forgot. I'm not sure if he even knows what the true debt of this province is. He says it's $11.6 billion, but he's not sure if $1.5 billion of unfunded liability should be added on to that or not. So he really can't even tell us what the true debt of this province is. So how can we believe what this man says? How can we believe him when he's borrowed $118 million more than he took in? How is that a balanced budget? That's voodoo economics that he learned under the school, John Buchanan School of Economics. Mr. Speaker, we're not interested in that at all. Mr. Speaker, what about some of the women's shelters here in Metro? Adsum House, Bryony House. All these are very worthwhile organizations. Female members of the PC caucus, they themselves should only know some of the real concerns that have been addressed or raised by these organizations, complaining about the government not doing enough, Mr. Speaker. We have another bite. Let's go for it.
Yes, order, please. The Honourable Member for Halifax, Bedford Basin.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Just for the members' information, I personally championed a new Centre for Women seeking to get off welfare and improve their lot in life. A commitment of this government to the tune of nearly $500,000, Mr. Speaker. And that member ought to recognize such
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Member for Halifax Bedford raised an interesting point, and I'm being advised by my colleague here that the time for this debate has expired, but due to the number of inappropriate and I say that with all respect, interventions, I will allow the Honourable Member 1 minute to sum up in his dissertation. Would be 5:57.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I would commend anyone that would support those type of initiatives, and the member knows that. But I think if we should go back a little in time, that that process was initiated under a previous administration. What about the Avalon Centre? Why are the representatives from the Avalon Centre coming here looking for funding? Why isn't that member from Bedford Basin?
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Look, I think in the interest and spirit of cooperation and fairness, that will conclude debate on Bill number 21. It may have been a mistake to add on an extra minute. The Honourable, member for Cape Breton South on a point of order.
Speaker, you made reference to the time allotted has expired. I don't know where you got that at, but the time allotted is 5:59.
I was advised by...
Pardon me? 5:59 is on here, and the Speaker that was presented to the Speaker before.
Yes, I have the document, and I took the sage advice of... the Honourable Government House Leader. No, time has elapsed on the bill, and we are going to move on. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
The opposition member's business is finished. Opposition member's business is completed. Thank you. Speaker, I move the House to now rise to meet again on the morrow at the hour of 12 noon. The House will sit from 12 to 8, and following the daily routine, Mr. Speaker, and question period, we'll go into second reading of public bills, commencing with Bill number 45. And, Mr. Speaker, following Bill 45, if we get that far, we'll go to Bill 43, and then to Bill number 1, and then Bill number 28. And somewhere along the way, Mr. Speaker, we'll get into a second reading of private and local bills. Now, that sounds like a host of work, Mr. Speaker, but that will be accomplished over Thursday and Friday. And for the benefit of members of the House, for planning purposes, on Friday we'll sit from 9 until 2. But however, on the completion of business, if it's any earlier, we will adjourn. So, Mr. Speaker, with those words, I would adjourn the House.
Okay. The motion, honourable members, is to adjourn and sit tomorrow from 12 noon until 8 p.m. Is it agreed? All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Stand adjourned. The late debate this evening has been sponsored by the member for Guysborough Port Hawkesbury. The honourable member for Guysborough Port Hawkesbury.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And it does give me great pleasure today to rise and speak about the exciting new opportunities that Guysborough County is experiencing and will experience in the future. Many of these new opportunities have been and will be made possible because of 37 trillion cubic feet of gas reserves, 200 kilometers off the coast of Guysborough County. Mr. Speaker,